We discuss how much the combine matters and much more with a very special guest next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And as we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, I am your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available on all platforms. And thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're back here on Purple Friday, the Combine in full swing. And here with us to dive into some Combine-related notes, it's former Baltimore Ravens wide receiver, Super Bowl champion Qadry Ismail. Q. Tons of stuff going on over these last couple weeks for the Ravens, and now they are in Indianapolis scouting out the next bunch of Ravens. How you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic, and this is the silly craziness of the offseason where if you ask a general manager or a scout a question, be sure to know that he's going to be telling you a lie, misdirection, deception, making sure the clandestine ways of an organization and their strategies will never be revealed.
Yeah, it's funny about when looking at the combine and everything that goes on and speaking to scouts, players, coaches, general managers, whatever, there are so many different things that they say. It's like the coach speak, the general manager speak of, oh yeah, this guy looks great, and then they don't have him on their board. Or like, this guy, we don't really know about him, but secretly they really, really, really want him. Like the Ravens, there have been stories that have come out about their smokescreen with Lamar Jackson and how they kind of maneuvered that and pushed it down to make sure that other teams didn't know about that. So it's really interesting. But yeah, a ton of combine talk to get into here today. But first, Q, the signing of Tony Jefferson last week made a couple of waves throughout Ravens Nation, as it feels like the signing overall to me, it's a nice depth signing. This isn't a needle moving move where it's like, oh, the Ravens signed Tony Jefferson. They're winning the Super Bowl. Everything is over, crown the Ravens here. But I like this move a lot in terms of a depth signing. He came in, played very well in 2021 in the action he had. So Q, what are your overall thoughts on Jefferson and the signing of the Ravens bringing him back?
So the main thing, you have a new defensive coordinator and you bring in a guy that knows your system. It's going to help younger players kind of learn the nuance of the system. So first and foremost, he has a good veteran presence. When he played last year, he produced under pressure and made some significant plays. So, he has game left. So that's a marker, if you will, to say that, look, we're going to sign him. We feel good about what he brings to the table, both in the locker room and on the football field. So I think it's a win for them, and it's a win for him that he gets a chance to keep on playing and playing for an organization that he's very familiar with.
Yeah, and how much, Q, do you think the off-field aspect of this was in the Ravens' decision to bring him back? Jefferson is someone, even dating back to his first stint, I mean, he is loved in the locker room, loved by his teammates, loved by his coaches, and seems like Baltimore is the place for him, and he's someone who, the players joke around with and just seems like a very down-to-earth person. So how much do you think that factored into this decision?
Well, I know when you play well, all other teams get a chance to look at you. And if you, for example, wanted to go where Wink Martin was going to go, there's a chance to, do the same thing. You know his defense. You know the nuances of it. You're a veteran player. You played well. You can go where Wink Martindale is going to go. There are other guys that have gotten stints as coordinators or other position coaches, and you easily can go to those different teams. But if you feel confident, comfortable with the locker room environment, with the culture, with the coaching staff stability, and what John Harbaugh brings to the table, and if the money is right, then you check off all those boxes. I think for Tony Jefferson, the bigger picture was that they checked off all these boxes and they wanted him, and so you didn't have to have some level of ambiguity, but exactly what was going on for your ball club, and it wound up working in his favor.
Yeah, and all all players have different priorities for them. Some people do want to sign bigger contracts. Others want the familiarity of a franchise. And so there are different benchmarks and check marks that players have in terms of, hey, I want to go here. I want to go there. And the Ravens, I agree with you, Q, offered a lot of what Jefferson wanted, it feels like. And now he's back in Baltimore for another season after playing really, really well. But again, as I kind of mentioned, this is not the be-all, end-all of this need, right? The Ravens still need a safety. I mean, Deshaun Elliott, free agent. We don't really know his status right now in terms of whether the Ravens would offer him a big money deal. It seems like that's not really in the cards right now because of his injury history, unfortunately, although he's very talented. So, Q, with Jefferson aside and knowing that he will be back in a Baltimore uniform, what else would you do at safety in order to solidify that position?
Yeah, I think, you look to the draft, you look to a veteran, possibility depending upon your salary cap needs and what the player wants. But I think that those are two valuable options, and value is critical when you look at what perhaps the Ravens are going to try to do to get compensatory picks and making sure that, teams are cutting their players and you're not necessarily, signing guys away from other teams. There's a lot of gamesmanship this offseason and all off seasons, but there's a lot of gamesmanship. And I think the main thing is, yes, Tony Jefferson is on the team, but there's more work to be done. That's the main takeaway from it, however they get.
Right. And those two avenues are two very good ones because there is talent in this free agent class for safety. There is also talent in the draft class, but it feels like there are a couple of high-end free agent options that could really take this defense over the top. I know the one that's gotten the most press in terms of maybe potential Raven is Tyrann Mathieu. There's also Marcus May from the Jets, Marcus Williams from the Saints. Are you in on any of those guys, Q?
Yeah, well, the Tyrann Mathieu, that one is more intriguing because he has that Ed Reed flavor. We saw Ed Reed, we saw Eric Waddle. Both guys were big-time ballers, big-time experience, big-time out-of-the-box thinkers, and, they were just so incredibly smart, and they made plays. We haven't seen truly that, even, bless Tony Jefferson's heart, but we haven't truly seen the likes of, Ed and Eric since they left. So, I just think that, yeah, Tyrann would be that guy that you can, really get fancy with the spices. And in the AFC North, it's similar to what you see out in the AFC West when you look at this style of play here. I don't think it has to be overly physical. Like, you're not going to look at, the NFC North or the, even the NFC East for that matter. You're not necessarily worrying about banging heads. Sure, you got to come up and stop the run. Sure, I understand that. But overall, you're trying to get into some throwing lanes and confuse some quarterbacks and pick off the ball.
Yeah, the funny thing about Mathieu is the Ravens were interested in him. Like, there have been reports that they were interested in him back in 2019 after his stint with Houston, and then he ultimately signed with Kansas City. The Ravens signed Earl Thomas that offseason, signed him to that big money deal. And we all know what happened with Earl Thomas. On the field, he was great. Off the field, it didn't work out. So I wanted Mathieu that offseason. That was my number one target. The addition of Thomas, that was something I thought was out of the Ravens' price range anyway. They gave him a huge deal. And look, on the field, it paid off. Off the field, it didn't. But Q, there are some talented safeties that I talked about in this draft class, especially a few in the first round. Now, at number 14, the Ravens have a bunch of avenues they could explore. Obviously, offensive tackle is one where a lot of people are clamoring for some fresh faces because there's just some uncertainty, obviously, at that position. But if there was a top-end safety available, let's say it was, like the top safety, Kyle Hamilton, would you be comfortable taking him over one of the best offensive tackles in this class if the safety represented the best player?
No. So when you look at need, when you look at best player available, the Ravens, they always go with, what does your board say? Ozzie has talked about that. Eric has doubled down and even spoken about it even more. I've been in many of Raven draft day, not necessarily the war room, but the way the facility was back then, and when I would do the different drafts, you're getting immediate access to everyone, and part of that access is just listening and taking it all in. One of the things that they kept talking about was the board. Once the board is locked, you go on your board. So if both players are available, then I think you got to go with your franchise guy and protecting him and doing what your offense, because this is, you want to get back to being, what this organization is known for. It's defense, no question about it, but you got not a Hall of Famer. You got a generational talent in Lamar Jackson. I think it's best if you go ahead and put him in position to succeed.
Right. And the Ravens, there's always a balance between their best player available versus needs-based picks. I feel like they always have their needs in mind when they do take the best player available. Like Marlon Humphrey, that pick, the Ravens didn't need a cornerback, but they looked a couple years down the road and said, hey, Jimmy Smith's not getting any younger. Brandon Carr's not getting any younger. We need some talent in this room, and Marlon Humphrey now is their best defender, arguably. And even you could look at the J.K. Dobbins pick. The Ravens didn't need a running back in that slot. But Mark Ingram not getting any younger, and now we see the 1-2 punch that Dobbins and Edwards are. So there is needs-based, there is best player available, but I think the Ravens have a pretty wide view of what they need to draft overall. But there's a lot more to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. Coming up in our second segment, we're going to be talking about the Combine and how much it really matters overall. So be sure to stay tuned for that. But first, I want to tell you a bit about BetOnline. Football is obviously over, but there's still basketball. It's in full swing for both pro and college hoops. And BetOnline.net has all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next fire coach is even going to land. BetOnline does remain the best spot for your sports scores. And it's not even just basketball. BetOnline.net, it has hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. So if you want to place any props, and NFL props are going to be trickling in here over the course of the next couple of weeks. You can head to the website today or use a mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back here with our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Qadry Ismail, former Baltimore Ravens wide receiver. Again, thank you for listening here today and making Locked On Ravens your first listen. And make sure you're following Locked On NFL, Locked On Experts, covering the biggest stories around the NFL every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And Q, this Combine 2022, a lot of high-profile players coming in, and yesterday we had the quarterbacks, wide receivers, and tight ends do some workouts. We had some blazing 40 times, by the way, from a couple of players, but there's a lot of talk about how much the Combine actually means, and there are a lot of, it feels like opposite ends of the spectrum where some people are, hey, the Combine means everything, and other people are like, hey, the Combine means absolutely nothing, just go out there and play. Are you on either one of those sides, or are you more of in the middle of, hey, it means something, but not everything?
It is multifaceted. The Combine means something for sure. It doesn't have the major weight, but you can also hurt yourself as well. It's a job interview. The interviews are arguably the most important thing for the coaches. The second most important thing are the physicals, because the general managers and the scouts, they need to make sure that you don't have some hidden injury that can cost you and put you in a position where you're no longer the top whatever choice. But with that said, the interview process, you got to show who you are and what you're all about, and can you fit with the club. And maybe perhaps the coaches, you don't necessarily dwell or gel, with them as well. And you kind of like, telling your agent, I didn't really kind of have a good vibe about it. Maybe, hopefully I'll go somewhere else. All those things come into play. It's the underwear Olympics that follow suit that you kind of like, let's see what they look like and see what they can do. People, get off on that. And that's why the NFL is such a ratings juggernaut, because the underwear Olympics come around and people will still tune in to watch.
Right. There's so much that goes into all these different drills, all these different tests. And I feel like people can be a bit blinded by like the 40, for example, people look at the 40 and go, oh, that guy's super fast or that guy's super slow. When in reality, all these different tests have multiple aspects to them. You talked about kind of the whole multifaceted part of what the combine is. Well, I think a lot of these tests have multiple aspects to them too, like 40. You have speed, you have acceleration, you have get off. There are a lot of different aspects of each individual drill that can come into there. But yeah, these teams want to talk to the players. They want to understand a bit about who they are and figure out if they're good fits for them in that regard. And yeah, some of the physical stuff as well. I mean, if teams then do the physicals and there's the Ravens, let's say the Ravens draft some guy who has some chronic injury that, won't get any better. And, he, instead of having a 10-year career, it's a 2-year career. And the Ravens spend the 14th pick on him. That, these physicals are very, very important overall.
Critical.
And I feel like, especially for positions like wide receiver, obviously the Ravens had a not so great pick in Rashad Perriman. Well, it feels like all those years ago. But if you remember, Q, I mean, the Ravens, he suffered that injury in practice. And John Harbaugh comes out and says, oh, it'll be a day or two. He'll come back and it'll be good. He misses the whole year. So, those physicals can become very important. But speaking of wide receivers, and I know, Q, you yourself, a former wide receiver, some of these wide receivers performed really, really well at the combine. And in terms of how much the Ravens actually need a wideout in this draft in particular, the Ravens have drafted 2 wide receivers in each of 2019, 2020, and 2021. So they are stocked at the position overall. But do you see an avenue where the Ravens could take a mid to late round wide receiver, or even maybe surprise some people and take one early?
I don't think the board dictates everything. It's a strong receiver class, so that might dictate where you see a guy. But then I honestly think there's a gut feeling in me for right now that is saying the Ravens really like who they got. And they would get guys that would be even later that perhaps, has an outside chance to make the team. But I really think in my heart of hearts, they like who they got right now. And they're not necessarily, oh, we got to get a receiver. But maybe in free agency, once the draft is over, or if it's just a late pick and they got some extra picks, and they met all their needs, and that guy just so happens to be the highest guy on the board, they would take him. I think the Ravens keep to their formula. They stick to their thing. Even Eric DeCosta, he was saying that he doesn't like to get caught up in all the pundits and all the different draft gurus as far as what they are going to say. It's like, well, let me stick to what we do, and what we do, it's worked for us. Outside of wide receiver, although I think, they've been pretty decent lately. But yeah, stick to the board. That's going to be priority number one, and that's what they're going to keep pushing out as far as their narrative is concerned.
Right. I'm with you. I could see a late round wide receiver. I don't necessarily think they need one, though. I feel like, in my opinion, I don't feel like Miles Boykin is making this team next year. I don't see a spot for him. I know they value special teams ability, but I think what they could do is, this receiver room is still young, right? Like 2019, 2020, 2021, those draft classes, Hollywood Brown's entering his 4th year, Duvernay and Prochet their 3rd, Bateman and Wallace their 2nd. If they can find a veteran of the mold of a Des Bryant, where it's like there's not an expected role, but he can play a couple of snaps, can come in and be a veteran just on the roster, I think that'd be a good move for them. Because with Sammy Watkins coming in, there was an expected role for him. He had to come in and signing the $6 million deal. He got a ton of snaps. I don't think the Ravens need to have a veteran come in and give him all those snaps. Like Mike Williams would make their team better, but do they need to spend $15 million per year on a wide receiver? No, they don't have to. There are other needs elsewhere. So I think that's really important process to talk about. But Q, a pass catcher that could help this Ravens team in the draft that actually is kind of a sneaky need is a tight end. The tight ends also went yesterday. And it feels like the Ravens have missed that wide receiver, tight end, 3rd tight end since Hayden Hurst left after the 2019 season. And now Hayden Hurst is a free agent. So, hey, maybe Hayden Hurst is coming home. Who knows? But I feel like there are a bunch of tight ends that could help this team out. Would you feel comfortable if the Ravens took a wide receiver or a wide receiver. I'm stuck on wide receivers. It's been me for so many years. But would you feel comfortable with the Ravens taking a tight end, let's say in the 3rd round or 4th round, when there could be other needs available there?
Sure, and even remember, Patrick Ricard is not necessarily a lock to be back. So, there's a lot there when it comes to maneuvering for what is a valuable position in Greg Roman's offense. Bully ball in 2018, 19 was just unreal. Like 3 tight ends and the way and how they went about just creating mismatches, and I was just fascinated by it. I'd never seen anything like it, and it was a historic offense for sure. But with that said, I personally would love to see them bring back Hayden, because I think he knows the nuance of the offense. I think there's chemistry within that locker room. Obviously, the draft element of it all. You have a guy in Mark Andrews who felt he was a first rounder. You got a guy in Hayden Hurst, if you turned on the tape where he was at, like, wow, he looked phenomenal. But I think it just didn't happen for him. Now, going into the locker room this time, I think it would be a little bit different because of the fact that, old boy got paid. But make no mistake about it, like, Kevin, I'm telling you, like, just knowing that you can, put defenses on notice with that valuable 3rd tight end really says an awful lot.
Yeah, and I know entering 2020, the Ravens were like, oh, we're not really going to address it. Patrick Ricard is going to play in line. And then he didn't really play in line for most of the season.
Yeah.
2021, they trade for Josh Oliver. They have Eric Tomlinson. Neither of those guys are needle movers, in my opinion. Oliver, there were some people had high expectations for Oliver and, the athletic profile that he had, but he didn't really do a ton. Nick Boyle didn't come. He never really came back from his injury. He was in and out. So tight end's actually, I think, a bigger need than some people might realize it is. And having a veteran like Hurst back would be great. But there are other tight ends in this draft class like Jeremy Ruckert, Chikakonkwo out of Maryland, who ran a nice 40. There are a couple guys who could, I think, make impacts as day 2, day 3 prospects that I think would work out well next to Andrews and hopefully a healthy Boyle as well. But finally, the last position that went yesterday, Q, on-field drills, were some of those quarterbacks. And quarterback, obviously, look, the Ravens don't need a franchise quarterback. They have one in Lamar Jackson. They also have the backup in Tyler Huntley. But do you see a scenario where the Ravens would maybe get into the 6th round and they feel like they might need to trade back into the draft because currently they don't have a 6th round pick to their name? Would you feel like they could move into the 6th round or 7th round to maybe get a 3rd stringer practice squad type player who could fit their system and they maybe wouldn't want to risk losing an undrafted free agency?
I think yes, but again, a lot of what we're seeing is the way in which Lamar is going to either do his contract or not do his contract. The way in which you think about a Tyler Huntley as a valuable backup. I don't know. I don't see them, looking. That I think that's put it this way. I think it's a low priority, to be perfectly honest with you. Very low priority.
Well, I feel like the Ravens got something valuable out of Josh Johnson, and he's a player that I would feel completely comfortable having as the practice squad 3rd string quarterback, where if you're in the 6th, 7th, 5th round and like they haven't taken a running back or a tight end or one of the lower needs on their priority list, and they're choosing between that and a quarterback, I'm taking the need every single time because I feel like the Ravens have a veteran option they could trust. There will be, I think, undrafted guys. There could even be guys in free agency who could feel comfortable. I mean, Trace McSorley, they could bring Trace McSorley back if they wanted to. So they have options there. I wouldn't be shocked if the Ravens did draft a quarterback late. I agree with you, Q, though. I don't think it's like the biggest priority in the world for them because they have Jackson, they have Huntley. It's not like they need a backup. They have one. And I think that's a huge thing to look at. But still a ton of combine talk to talk about. We're going to get into Q's combine and how that whole process went for him. A ton of great insight on the way, so stay tuned for that. But first, I want to tell you a bit about Built Bar. And I know this is the time of year people are giving up on their New Year's resolutions, but don't do that, especially if you're talking about eating right, and do it with Built Bar. Built Bar Puffs are the new craze. They're the first ever Built Bar protein-infused marshmallow. They're fluffy and marshmallowy, and all Built Bars are covered in 100% real chocolate. And they're also low-calorie, high-protein. You can replace your candy bars with these because they taste better than them. The Built Bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. And there are a ton of different flavors: mint brownies, great, coconut, almond. There's also a new white chocolate cookies and cream. So go to built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. We're back here with our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oshucker still here with Qadry Ismail. Thank you again for making Locked On Ravens your first listen every day. We'll be back here on Monday with another Mock Draft Monday, but make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. But Q, I'm going to put you on the spot here and talk a bit about what you went through during your combine preparations, the actual event itself. So let's start with preparation for the combine and just where you were at that time, getting ready for the drills, for the interviews, for the physicals. How much work was that over those couple of months, couple of weeks getting ready?
So it is interesting because the combine prep has become its own little cottage industry. And for me, I was probably before it became really popular and in vogue. Oh, you got to go find a trainer. You got to be somewhere. I was with my track coach, and we were just preparing for indoor season. And because obviously track, you sprint an awful lot. You work on your sprinting technique an awful lot. That was the main thing. I think catching the ball, I got one of my teammates and went over to the indoor facility, and we just, threw the ball around. And that was kind of how it went. Like, I didn't do a heck of a lot when it came to the combine prep. Like, it was hilarious. So we played, I believe it was Colorado in the Fiesta Bowl. The Fiesta Bowl comes, the Fiesta Bowl goes, we win. Woo, we go ahead and fly back to Syracuse. Kevin, I flew back to Syracuse, and I just thought for a hot second, my goodness, I am really super popular. Why? My locker was stuffed with mail. And I'm like, wow, I didn't know. I might have got like 2 or 3 pieces of mail tops when, you're at Syracuse. I mean, social media-wise was non-existent. And if it was in play back then, like it is now, goodness, that would have been dangerous because I definitely was like, I was a guy to myself, but yet I definitely didn't mind interacting with fans on social media. When I get to my locker, bruh, it was nothing but agents. It had nothing to do with nothing. They all wanted to represent me, and they wanted to set everything up. And I was thinking, okay, I'm not popular. It's just business. And so you quickly realize the business side of football is here, and it's on us. And so, again, from a 40 standpoint, I knew what I needed to do. Catching the ball was kind of an issue because of my astigmatism and my vision was just horrendous. So I just really diligently worked on my craft. But again, Kevin, once you get there to the combine, it is like, all right, I'm here. I'm one of the guys. And, I ate it up. I was present. I was ready. I was going to present myself. This is why you should draft me. All of that. I had no reservations about anything. Wasn't trying to play any mind games. Some guys were talking about, what they were or weren't going to do. I was like, well, gosh, I mean, I'm running. I probably won't bench press, which I didn't. And, did the Wonderlick. I don't even know what I scored. I probably scored some weird number. Who knows? I We did. I think it was John Gruden was a position coach, I think, for the Green Bay Packers at the time, I believe. He did the gauntlet that they do today. He set up this gauntlet where, receiver had his back. He's going to turn around, catch the ball. Then he's just going to look over here, catch the ball, look over here, catch the ball, look over, and just run through the gauntlet. So I remember going through that. Remember Trent Green, I believe, was my guy. Drew Bledsoe, I believe, was there. And there's a couple other guys that I don't recall off the top of my head, but it was fun. It was all of it. And that was another thing. So nowadays they got these like cleats that are ultra light.
Mm-hmm.
Bruh. We had to run and you're not allowed track spikes, which the cleats are darn near track spikes. But we had that old school turf, so you didn't have cleats anyway, but you couldn't wear track spikes or they'd be all mad at you. So you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, you old crotchety so-and-so of a scout. Well, I remember that day I hustled to Foot Locker and was like, yo, I need your lightest running shoe. I got the lightest running shoe and the insole. I took out the insole. I was trying to make it even lighter. I wore those. And contrary to some reports, I ran a 4.41. And yeah, so that was one of the faster times, and it was fun. It was a fun experience.
Yeah, okay. There are some sites out there that have Q's 40 time at 4.49. You heard it from the source himself. There is no better source than the actual person who ran the 40. That is inaccurate. This is Mr. 4.41 in the presence of me here on this show today. Q, how was that whole process running the 40 once you got the shoes, took the insoles out? Did you feel like you were flying down the field? Was the time what you expected when you were running it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I wanted to run 4.3. I had run 4.3 multiple times before, so that was no big deal. At my pro day, I ran 4.3, and it was on Syracuse's track with a light pair of shoes on that, people weren't really tripping. Indianapolis turf was a, touch slow, but whatever. The broad jump I did, and the measurement of, holding your arms up, I kind of like, they wanted you to do this. I was like, okay. And then they try to pull up your arms. I was like, yeah, okay. So I'm like holding my arms back. I remember Lamar Thomas, actually, fellow wide receiver. He was with the Miami Hurricanes, and he was like, yo, do this. So he was showing me how to do it. He was, we did the cone drills and stuff. And it was interesting because while I did the cone drills and all that, and my coach was ahead of his time, he actually, in our winter workouts, all my years at Syracuse, we did the combine drills. We did the combine. So it was like, oh, I know this 3-cone drill. Oh, you want me to do a 4-cone drill? Oh, you want me to do, the 5-10-5? Like, I know all this. Like, there was no surprise whatsoever in anything that we did, because Mike Wojcik, our strength and conditioning coach, who actually was on with the Dallas Cowboys by the time I became a senior, but what he taught me was locked in, and it just made for a fun experience at the combines.
Yeah, and part of what you talked about for the combine is obviously the interview process and talking to teams and talking to everybody and what goes on there. Were some of the questions you were asked along the lines of what you were expecting there when you were talking with people overall throughout the event?
Say that one more time, like as far as the interview?
As far as the event, yeah, the interview process.
Yeah. So I had the 49ers. I don't know why they stick out more than anybody. I think it's just because I really liked Jerry Rice and just the whole flow of, the 49ers and what they meant. But they were like, what's your favorite route? I was like, I don't know, 7. And it was like, why 7 route? And I explained it. But basically, my game was not a 7 route. My game was, we had what is called play pass. And so we would literally, or the freeze option. So we would, the quarterback would step off the line of scrimmage, 1 yard, boom. The fullback would dive, and he would read the the under tackle, and he would pull the ball or he would pull it or give it. 99.9% of the time, he's pulling it. Then he'd run down the line, and he'd either pitch it based upon the guy on the end line of the scrimmage. We also had play pass where you would run and you would stalk block the guy, and you would turn and present yourself, and you would get an easy catch. So that play pass action or run pass action, we did an awful lot, and I made a living off of it. Well, in the NFL, it's called a hitch route. So we would run hitches, and I've scored on hitch routes in my collegiate time. Well, they wanted, and that was part of my game, was a strong run after catch. As soon as I got the ball, you just, it was hard to bring me down. So I probably should have said that. The one interesting note, when we went to do our physicals, it was hilarious because they all were sitting there and they were like, all right, they were talking to their dictaphones. Well, my shoulder, I got a separated shoulder. You can see that lump right there. So they weren't sure if this was a grade 1 or grade 2. And I remember when I was at the hospital getting, the shoulder checked out, they were like, well, we think it's a grade 1. So that's all I know. And it was like, yeah, your ligament is still kind of attached, but, really that bone, it'll calcify over. You got to separate your shoulder. So fast forward to the combine, and everybody's looking at my shoulder. Oh, does it hurt? I'm like, no, my shoulder is going to be sore if you keep pressing down on it. And they were trying to figure out if it was a grade 1 or grade 2. And it was hilarious because some people said it was a grade 2. Some people said it was grade 1. Robert Smith, the great Vikings running back, who was the Vikings first-round pick. I was the Vikings second-round pick. They were looking at his quad because his quad tendon or ligament, whatever, snapped, and his muscle rolled up into, part of his quad rolled up in. And so you're like, oh, my God. And they were examining. He was like, yeah, no, this is nothing. Like, I'm fine. Like, I don't know why we're even having this conversation. So lots of just back and forth and, we don't know, well, this, well, that. But, the bottom line was you just knew what you were getting into. And if you can just stomach it and just recognize that, this is part of the interview process, go ahead and do it. I thoroughly enjoyed all of it. Like, I just thought, I am Qadry Ismail. I feel good about, what I've done. And sure enough, it worked, because clearly being a second round pick, I had to have done something correct.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm glad they didn't press down too hard that it separated again. That would have been it with everything you were talking about. But it feels like the combine, it has changed tremendously over the years. And there are some things that have been amplified and are now much more important than they were, and other things that are kind of like, it's not really as big of a deal anymore than what they were a couple years ago, many years ago. So that whole experience is really interesting to hear about, and just everything that has changed as the combine has gone on. But Q, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me here on the show. And, throughout the weekend, guys will be testing, guys will be going through these drills. And then when we get back next week, we can talk about how some of the top performers were able to do.
Yeah, looking forward to it, and definitely enjoy talking down memory lane.
Absolutely. Mr. 441 in the flesh for you, Qadry Ismail. That's all I have you here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. When we get back here on Monday, we'll dive into another mock draft Monday. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you on Monday.